In Lochdubh, the tide comes in, the tide goes out, but one morning the board tells a lie. Before that there was only mist, grievance, and the small daily theatre of a harbour where every rope, crate, buoy, and battered kettle seemed to have an owner ready to defend it. A stranger had come, with drawings of brass lamps and visitor fees, speaking the kind of polished language that makes working men check their boots for mud. The village listened, smiled thinly, and began choosing sides without admitting it. Hamish Macbeth, who preferred disputes to remain small enough to be solved over tea, found himself standing between old loyalties and new money, and somewhere among the mooring flags a chipped blue pin was already waiting to matter. Chapter 1. Flags in the Mist. The first sign of trouble in Lochdubh was not a man. It was a row of flags. They had appeared along the harbour at low tide, bright little scraps of red, yellow, blue and white tied to stakes beside the mooring posts. They were too clean for the place. Lochdubh harbour was a working harbour, and working things seldom looked new for more than a morning. The slip was green with weed, fish boxes leaned against the wall, and ropes lay in stiff coils that smelled of salt, diesel, and old weather. By 8 o'clock, half the village had found a reason to pass by. Mrs. Patel came with a flask of tea and sandwiches, explaining that cold air made people unreasonable and therefore needed feeding. Tavish Munro stood beside his small boat, jaw set hard. Niall Fraser, the old harbour convener, leaned on his stick near the harbour office and looked at the new flags as if they had insulted his mother. Hamish Macbeth arrived late, having failed to persuade Luggs that damp civic duty was better than the warm kitchen floor. Luggs followed at last, then stopped beside a coil of rope and sat down with the air of a dog refusing to endorse progress. "What's this, then?" Hamish asked. "Survey markers," said Niall. "Land grab," said Tavish. Niall sighed. "Do not start before breakfast." "I didna start it," Tavish said. "Whoever put these here started it." Before Hamish could answer, a car came down the road and stopped above the quay. Malcolm Rusk got out wearing polished boots and a waxed jacket that had never been asked to do anything difficult. 2 young men followed him with rolled plans and clipboards. "Good morning," Rusk called. "Wonderful to see so much local engagement." Nobody in Lochdubh liked being called engagement before tea. Rusk smiled anyway and came down to the harbour, stepping carefully around a fish crate. "Malcolm Rusk. Rusk Coastal Partnership. We're here to discuss a sensitive regeneration of underused coastal assets." "It's a harbour," said Tavish. "Exactly," said Rusk. "And it could be so much more." One of his assistants pinned a glossy drawing to the wall of the harbour office. It showed Lochdubh transformed into a neat marina, with brass lamps, visitor berths, tidy little leisure boats, and planters along the quay. "Planters," said Mrs. Patel. Her tone suggested the word had been found guilty. Rusk pointed to the drawing. "Proper lighting, secure moorings, visitor fees to fund maintenance, and a more attractive experience for coastal tourism." "And where do the fish boxes go?" asked Tavish. "There would be designated commercial space. Away from visitors." "Optimised," said Rusk. "Away from visitors," Tavish repeated. Hamish took the cup of tea Mrs. Patel offered him and watched the faces around the quay. Folk were not only angry. Anger was simple. This was fear dressed up as irritation. A harbour could be altered by money long before anyone admitted it had been lost. Rusk turned toward Hamish. "Constable Macbeth, I hope we can count on your help keeping things calm." "Calm is easier when folk understand what is happening. Nothing is being imposed. That's how it feels from here." Tavish stepped forward. "You'll never put a gate on Lochdubh Quay." Rusk's smile thinned. "No one mentioned a gate." "You will." Niall lifted a hand. "Enough, Tavish." But the younger man's face had gone pale with the effort of holding himself in. His mother sold fish from a van above the harbour. His boat was small, patched, and barely profitable. For men like Rusk, that made it inefficient. For Tavish, it was a life. Rusk looked around at the watching villagers. "Informal arrangements cannot continue forever. Moorings must be regularised. Some will be moved. Some may be billed differently. Some may not qualify at all. A low murmur passed through the group. Niall moved to the old tide board outside the harbour office. It was a warped wooden board under a tin hood, marked with times, tide lines, and old scratches. A chipped blue enamel pin showed the next safe landing window. "This board has served longer than most companies," Niall said. Rusk glanced at it. "Charming." That word did him no good. Niall took hold of the blue pin and shifted it to the next hole. It stuck. He pressed harder. A tiny flake of blue enamel came away on his thumb. Hamish noticed because Niall wiped it quickly on his sleeve. "Pin's near done," Hamish said. "So are many things," Niall replied. The assistant's drawing loosened in the wind. Beneath it, Hamish glimpsed another sheet. A harder-looking plan, with mooring lines, numbers, and names marked in blocks. Then Rusk stepped across and folded it away. Tavish saw enough to stiffen. "That's my berth. All current usage is being recorded," said Rusk. "My father tied up there. I'm sure he did. My grandfather, too." Rusk's voice stayed smooth. "Long use does not always equal legal right." The harbour went quiet. It was Mrs. Patel who broke it. "More tea?" No one answered. Niall turned back to the villagers. "There'll be a consultation tomorrow at Tommel Castle Hotel. After that, the Harbour Committee will meet. Until then, nobody cuts down flags, nobody shouts themselves stupid, and nobody gives Mr. Rusk the pleasure of thinking we are uncivilized." "I would never say that," said Rusk. "No," said Mrs. Patel. "You would find a more expensive word." A small laugh moved through the crowd, but it did not last. People began to drift away, carrying their anger carefully, as Highland people often carried things they could not afford to drop. Tavish stayed by his boat, staring at the flags. Niall spoke to him in a low voice, one hand on the young man's shoulder. Tavish did not pull away, but neither did he soften. Rusk watched them both. That interested Hamish. It was not merely the watchfulness. Everybody watched everybody in Lochdubh. It was the small smile that crossed Rusk's face, as if the quarrel had gone exactly as expected. Hamish looked again at the tideboard. The chipped blue pin sat in its new place, bright against the weathered wood. Around one hole, the paint was freshly scuffed. Beside him, Luggs sneezed at the harbour office door. "Aye," Hamish murmured. "That's about the size of it." The mist thickened over the water. The new flags snapped in the wind, cheerful and wrong, while the old board marked the tide as if nothing in Lochdubh had shifted at all. Chapter 2. The Man Who Bought the View. By noon, the flags had become larger in conversation than they were in fact. At breakfast they were survey markers. By 10 they were boundary posts. By 11, Jessie Curry had heard they were the first step toward fencing the quay. By noon, in Patel's shop, Nessie Curry said there might be a turnstile. "A turnstile," Jessie repeated, "for honest folk to be counted like sheep." Mrs. Patel weighed flour into a paper bag. "Who told you this?" "It is being said," said Nessie. "By whom?" Jessie lowered her voice. "By people close to the harbour." Hamish Macbeth, standing beside the tinned tomatoes, said, "That'll be everyone with ears." The Curry sisters looked at him with mild disappointment. They preferred gossip to be received with more ceremony. The shop window held the official marina notice, pinned beside cards, advertising eggs, piano lessons, a missing creel marker, and a man from Ullapool who repaired outboard engines, but not, according to handwriting underneath, very quickly. Tavish Munro came in, picked up a loaf, put it down, then picked it up again. "Your mother all right?" Mrs. Patel asked. "Aye. And the van?" "Still running." "That is not the same answer." Tavish looked down. "She's worried. If they move the boats and put fees on the quay, folk will not stop for fish." Mrs. Patel slipped a packet of tea beside the loaf. "This is near its date." "It is not. It will be one day." Before Tavish could object, the bell over the door rang again. Malcolm Rusk entered with a folded plan under his arm and the confidence of a man who believed every small room could be made grateful by his presence. "Good afternoon," he said. "I wonder if I might look at the harbour notice." "It is in the window," said Mrs. Patel. Rusk stepped toward it. Tavish did not move out of his way. The shop became very small. "Mr. Munro," said Rusk. "Mr. Rusk. Still opposed to improvement? Still opposed to being improved out of a living?" Rusk smiled, as if Tavish had made a simple error in arithmetic. "The harbour cannot continue on informal habits. My father tied up there. His father, too. Long use is not always legal right." The words had a clean, sharp edge. Hamish moved one tin of tomatoes, then another, until he was standing near enough to matter. Rusk took the notice down and folded it. The card about the missing creel marker fluttered to the floor. Tavish bent to pick it up. "I'll need access to the old mooring register," Rusk said. Niall Fraser had entered quietly enough that even the Curry sisters started. "You'll need more than wanting," he said. Niall stood just inside the door, cap in hand, his coat darkened with mist. He had the grave, patient look he wore at committee meetings, funerals, and occasions when someone had tied up in the wrong place and pretended not to know. Rusk turned. "Mr. Fraser, you can help us. The register must be reviewed before the consultation. It is an old record, not a toy for men with glossy drawings. It is a public document. It is a working document. Then it should stand up to scrutiny." Niall's eyes narrowed. "Say what you mean." Rusk looked around the shop, lowering his voice just enough to ensure every person heard him. "Only that some defenders of this harbour may already have made private arrangements. It would be unfortunate if the official story differed from the private one." The shop went still. Tavish stared at Niall. "What is he talking about?" Niall laughed. It was not a great laugh, but it arrived half a beat late and left too quickly. Hamish noticed Mrs. Patel glance at him over the flour bag. "Developers always lie when they cannot count fish," Niall said. Rusk folded the notice carefully. "We shall see." The bell rang hard, and Blair came in carrying damp air, cigarette smoke, and official irritation. "What's this, Macbeth?" he demanded. "Public disorder in a grocer's." "Shopping," said Hamish. Blair looked from Tavish to Rusk and back again. "I've had a complaint about threats at the harbour." "I did not threaten him," said Tavish. "You said he'd never put a gate on the quay," said Rusk. "That's not a threat. That's a promise to object." Blair jabbed a finger toward Tavish. "You watch yourself. I know your sort. Bit of boat, bit of rope, mother selling fish from a van, and suddenly you think you own the coast." Tavish went white around the mouth. Mrs. Patel set both hands flat on the counter. "Mr. Blair," but Hamish spoke first. "Careful." The word was quiet. Blair turned. "What?" Hamish's voice had kept its Highland softness, but there was steel running under it now. "You heard me. Are you telling me how to speak?" "Aye. When you forget how." No one in the shop moved. Even the Curry sisters looked too interested to breathe. Blair's face darkened. "You're getting above yourself, Macbeth." "No," said Hamish. "I'm standing between noise and damage." For a moment, Blair looked ready to shout. Then he remembered the witnesses, the shop, and Mrs. Patel's expression, which had become calm in a way that did not promise safety. Rusk slipped the folded notice into his case. "Gentlemen, please. The last thing I want is unpleasantness." This was so plainly false that nobody troubled to answer. "There will be a community consultation tomorrow," Rusk continued. "Tommel Castle Hotel, 3 o'clock. I hope we can speak like adults." "That depends who starts," said Mrs. Patel. Rusk gave her a smile with no warmth in it and left. Blair followed after glaring at Tavish, Hamish, and the biscuits, as if all three had failed the nation. When the door closed, the shop seemed to exhale. Nessie said, "Well," Jessie said, "Quite." Tavish put the loaf back on the shelf. "I've no money on me." Mrs. Patel put it into a paper bag. "I did not hear you say that." "You did?" "No. I heard men being important." Niall touched Tavish's shoulder. "Keep your temper, lad." "My temper's the only thing anyone notices. They notice more than you think." Tavish looked at him. "Then what was that about private arrangements?" Niall's face settled into patience. "A trick." Rusk throws mud and watches who wipes himself. You laughed. I found him ridiculous. Hamish listened to the answer. It was good enough for a meeting, but not quite good enough for a quiet room. Tavish took the bread and tea at last, muttered thanks, and left. Niall followed more slowly. At the door he paused. You'll no let Blair make the boy into a villain because he is loud. I try not to let Blair make anything, said Hamish. Niall gave a short nod and went out into the mist. Mrs. Patel began rearranging tins that needed no help. You heard the laugh! Aye. A man laughs too loudly when he is hiding the sound he nearly made. Hamish looked through the window toward the harbour. The new flags flickered in the wet air, bright and foolish against the grey water. He had thought the quarrel was between Lochdubh and Malcolm Rusk. Now he wondered what else had already been tied quietly to the moorings. Chapter 3. High tea, low manners. Tommel Castle Hotel had decided the marina consultation required high tea. This was a mistake. High tea, in Lochdubh opinion, was something for visitors who thought a scone could become dinner if placed on a tiered stand. Harbour people liked their food plain, hot, and not served with a napkin folded into a bishop's hat. Still, they came. By 3 o'clock, the hotel tea room held fishermen in clean jerseys, shopkeepers in good cardigans, 2 crofters who had not entered the hotel since a wedding in 1987, and several villagers who claimed to be attending only to hear the nonsense properly. Outside the windows, the harbour lay half hidden under sea mist. The new flags could just be seen, tiny bright marks against the grey. Priscilla Halberton-Smythe moved through the room with a tray of cups, and the calm competence of a woman used to smoothing situations she had not created. Hamish, she said, pausing beside him, please tell me no one intends to overturn a teapot. I cannae promise that. This hotel has survived shooting parties, American genealogy tours, and 1 vegetarian Burns night. It deserves mercy. Hamish smiled. I'll do my best. You always say that when you intend to do very little. Aye, but I say it kindly. She left him with a small look that managed to be both amused and resigned. Malcolm Rusk stood near the front beside an easel holding the marina drawing. He looked polished, rested, and pleased with the room. That alone made several people dislike him more. Niall Fraser sat in the first row, hands folded over his stick. Tavish Munro stood at the back, refusing a chair, as if sitting might weaken his argument. His mother, Morag, had come too, wrapped in a dark coat, her face weathered and guarded. She had brought no fish to sell, but she carried the faint smell of the van with her, which seemed a better credential than any printed invitation. Rusk began with thanks. He thanked the hotel, the village, the harbour committee, the wider coastal community, and stakeholders. At that word, Jessie Curry whispered. Does he mean us? Nessie whispered back. Only if we stand still. Hamish stood by the side wall under orders from Strathbane to observe and report on public disorder risk. He had no wish to report anything except that the scones were dry. Rusk clicked open a pointer. Our proposal is not about removing tradition, he said. It is about securing the harbour's future. A future with visitor fees, said Tavish. A managed fee structure, said Rusk. For visitors? For all users. There was a stir. Morag Munro said quietly. Then say all users. Rusk looked at her, and for one moment his smooth public face slipped into annoyance. Mrs. Munro, I appreciate this is emotional. It is financial, she said. That earned a murmur of approval. Rusk recovered. Without investment, the harbour will continue to decay. Niall rose slowly. He did not need to raise his voice. He had the sort of authority that came from standing in drafts for decades, while other people argued about rope. This harbour has carried work, weather, and worry longer than any of us. It needs repair, aye, it needs honesty, but it does not need to be turned into a postcard for people who think fish arrive wrapped in parsley. There was applause. Not wild applause, but deep and satisfied. Rusk smiled. Hamish noticed it. It was not the smile of a man beaten in argument. It was the smile of a man hearing a speech he had expected, perhaps even needed. The formal questions began. Who would own the new pontoons? Would winter berths cost more? Could local boats be guaranteed space? What happened to the fish van? Would the Harbour Office remain public? Rusk answered with words that moved smoothly around the answers. Subject to review. Priority consideration. Community partnership. Transitional arrangement. Mrs. Patel, who had brought her own notebook, wrote down each phrase as if collecting evidence of a foreign language. During a lull, Hamish saw Rusk take a slim folder from his case. A paper slipped half free. It was not one of the public drawings. There was a signature line near the bottom and, above it, the words conditional option. Then Niall moved toward the tea table. Rusk saw him coming and folded the page away at once. Hamish did not move, but the small action settled in his mind. A conditional option, not proof of anything by itself. Yet the page had been hidden too quickly, and men did not hide harmless paperwork in rooms full of people already suspicious of paperwork. Priscilla came to Hamish's side with a fresh cup. "You have that look?" she said. "What look?" "The one that means you are pretending not to think." "I'm thinking the scones could be used for harbour defence." "Then your report will at least contain one true thing." Across the room, Tavish had cornered Rusk near the easel. "You'll no move my mother's van. I won't discuss individual commercial uses in a public crush. You'll discuss them when you're pricing them out." Niall stepped between them. "Leave it, Tavish." "Why? So he can put a polite word on it?" "Because shouting helps him." Tavish looked wounded by that. Because it was true. Rusk lowered his voice, but not enough. "Mr. Munro, you are making yourself the face of disorder. That may not help your case." Tavish's hands curled. Hamish crossed the room. "Tea," he said. Tavish stared at him. "What?" "Drink some." "I don't want tea." "You want to hit him? Tea is cheaper." A few people laughed, and the danger in the corner loosened. Rusk gave Hamish a thin smile. "You are good at lowering the temperature, Constable. Only in rooms with poor heating." Rusk leaned closer. "Make sure it stays lowered. If this turns ugly, I will have no choice but to speak directly to your senior officers." "That would give them a grand afternoon." "I mean it." "So do they, usually." For a moment, they looked at one another without politeness. Then Rusk stepped back and lifted his voice to the room. "We will circulate revised details after reviewing the harbour register." Niall's face changed by almost nothing. Hamish saw it because he was watching. The meeting broke into small groups after that. Some people ate to avoid speaking. Others spoke to avoid thinking. Blair was not present, which improved the room more than the tea did. By the window, Morag Munro wrapped uneaten sandwiches in a napkin and slipped them into her bag. Mrs. Patel saw and turned away at once, granting privacy as a kindness. Hamish stood near the easel after most people had gone. The glossy marina drawing still showed brass lamps, tidy leisure boats, and flower planters where fish boxes should have been. Niall came beside him. "Ugly thing," he said. "The drawing? The future, if fools get to design it." Hamish glanced at him. "Rusk said some folk had made private arrangements." Niall's mouth tightened. "Rusk says many things." "Ah, yea. You dinna believe him?" "I listen first." "That can be mistaken for believing, only by folk in a hurry." Niall gave a short, humourless laugh. This one sounded better than the laugh in Patel's shop, but not by much. Outside, the mist moved over the harbour in pale bands. The flag showed and vanished, showed and vanished. Hamish watched Niall walk away toward the stairs, his stick tapping softly on the hotel floor. The consultation had ended without broken china, raised fists, or anything Strathbane could put in a report. But Hamish had seen Rusk hide a page, and he had seen Niall pretend not to care. Chapter 4. The Slip at Blue Tide. The mist came in before dawn, and sat on Lochdubh like wet wool. Hamish woke to the sound of a gull complaining somewhere above the police station roof. For a moment he lay still, listening to rain tick against the window and lugs breathing under the table with the steady disapproval of an old sergeant. Then the phone rang. It was Morag Munro. "There's something at the harbour," she said. Hamish sat up. "Something?" "A man. By the lower slip." Her voice was flat in the way fear sometimes made people careful. Not screaming, not weeping. Worse than that. "I'll comb." He dressed quickly and went down through the village. The mist swallowed the cottages halfway up their walls. Sounds came oddly. Rope knocking wood, water slapping stone, someone's door closing too loudly in the damp morning. At the harbour, Morag stood by her fish van with both hands wrapped around a mug she had not drunk from. Tavish was beside her, white-faced and furious-looking, though the fury had no place to go. Near the lower slip, Malcolm Rusk lay still on the wet stones. There was no drama in it, which made it harder. A body in morning mist did not look theatrical. It looked misplaced. Rusk's polished boots were dark with water. A folder lay open a few feet away, its papers damp and curling. One of the new mooring flags had torn loose and stuck to the stones like a scrap of colour that had lost its purpose. Hamish moved slowly. "Who found him?" Morag swallowed. "I did. Came to check the van before market. Thought it was a coat at first." "Did you touch him?" "No." "Tavish?" The young fisherman shook his head. "I came when she shouted." Hamish looked at him. "You shouted?" "I called for help," Morag said. "Not shouted. I couldn't seem to shout." Hamish nodded. "Go up to the van, both of you. Stay there." Tavish did not move. "Folk will say it was me." "Folk say many things before breakfast." "I told him he'd never put a gate on the quay." "Aye. And half the village heard him deserve it." That was not comfort. But it was something. Hamish crouched near the folder. He did not touch it yet. The top sheet was a public marina plan, wet through at the corner. Beneath it were notes in Rusk's neat hand. Harbour register, disputed moorings, Fraser, Munro, option. Hamish's eyes rested on the last word. Option. The page he had glimpsed at the hotel was not there. He rose and walked toward the tideboard. The blue enamel pin marked the safe landing window. Only, it was wrong. Hamish knew the board well enough to feel the wrongness before he proved it. The tide at that hour should have made the lower slip treacherous, not safe. The pin had been pushed into a hole one line too low. Around that hole, the wood was freshly scratched. He bent closer. Tiny flakes of blue enamel lay on the damp sill below the board, bright as paint chips from a toy boat. There were more on the wet stone beneath. Someone had forced the pin. Behind him, a car arrived too fast for the road and stopped with a spray of gravel. Blair emerged, hat askew, coat flapping, and cigarette already in his mouth, though the mist made it sulk rather than burn. "Macbeth!" he barked. "What have you done now?" "Found a dead man, Blair." "I can see that." "Who is it?" "Malcolm Rusk." Blair looked toward the slip, and Hamish saw the moment calculation overtook irritation. A dead developer was not merely a body. It was paperwork, headlines, senior officers, and possibly a chance to sound important. "Accident?" Blair demanded. Maybe. The man was threatened in public yesterday." Hamish looked toward Tavish, who stood near the van with his mother's hand on his sleeve. Blair followed his gaze and pounced on it. "Munro! Of course! Temper like a dog with a sore tooth. You've been here 10 seconds, and I've learned more in 10 seconds than you do in a week of wandering about with that animal." Lugs, who had followed Hamish at a distance and now stood near the harbour wall, sneezed magnificently. Blair glared at him too. "Keep folk back," Hamish said. "I give the orders." "Then order folk back." Blair opened his mouth, closed it, and shouted at a fisherman to stop standing where he had been standing harmlessly for 20 years. Hamish returned to the slip. A torn strip of cloth lay near Rusk's folder. It matched the bright blue of Tavish's mooring flag from the Morag M. The scrap was wet, muddied, and neatly placed enough to trouble him. It would please Blair. That was never a good sign. The mist shifted. For a moment the harbour opened, boats low in the water, flags snapping faintly, the tide creeping up the stone as if arriving late to its own appointment. Niall Fraser came down the quay with his stick, his face grey. Is it true? Hamish stood. Aye. Niall looked toward the lower slip, then away. God help us. You were here late? At the office till 10:30. Committee notes. Anyone else? Not when I left. Hamish watched him. You set the board yesterday. I often set the board. It's wrong this morning. Niall's brows drew together. Wrong? Aye. The old man stepped to the tideboard and stared at it. That is not where I left it. Who else touches it? Anyone with no sense could touch it. But few would. Few? Niall's jaw tightened. Harbour men. Me. Tavish sometimes, if I ask him. Old Sandy used to, before his hip went. It is not locked, Hamish. It was never meant to be. Blair came back, already breathing hard. Munro's flag near the body. Threats yesterday. Case is not exactly a crossword puzzle. Most things aren't to you, said Hamish. What? Nothing. Blair pointed toward Tavish. I want him taken in. For questioning, maybe. For murder. You've no post-mortem, no time fixed, and no proof he was here. I've got motive. You've got noise. Blair's face reddened. And you've got your usual village blindness. Hamish's voice dropped. Careful. It was the same word he had used in Patel's shop, and Blair heard the memory of it. Before Blair could answer, Mrs. Patel arrived at the edge of the quay, wrapped in a dark coat, carrying nothing. That, in itself, showed the seriousness of the morning. She looked at Rusk, then at Tavish, then at Hamish. I have told people to stay back, she said. Thank you. They are not obeying. But they are doing it farther away. Hamish almost smiled. He turned once more to the tideboard. The blue pin sat in the wrong hole, chipped and stubborn. It had been a small, useful thing, trusted because everyone knew it, and no one thought to question it. This morning, it had lied, and Malcolm Rusk was dead below it. Chapter 5. Bad fish pie, good chowder. Strathbane police station smelled of wet coats, old paper, and fish pie that had given up on ambition. Hamish sat in the canteen with a plate before him, and no appetite for it. Across the table, Blair ate with the grim determination of a man proving a point to food. It's Munro, Blair said. You've said that. I'll say it again until you show signs of sense. Public threat. Violent temper. His flag beside the body. Mother's livelihood under threat. That's motive enough to hang a coat on. You're no hanging coats. You're investigating a death. Blair stabbed the fish pie. I know what I'm doing. Hamish looked at the grey square on Blair's fork and decided not to argue with either man or meal. MacNab came in with the first notes from the scene. Rusk had likely died between midnight and 4, though the medical officer was cautious. There were bruises consistent with a fall, possibly after a struggle, possibly not. The folder had been logged. The torn flag scrap had been bagged. The tideboard was photographed, though Blair had called it that wooden timetable thing twice before the photographer understood him. Hamish read the list of items recovered from Rusk's folder. Public plan, consultation notes, handwritten names, copy of harbour notice, sketch of mooring lines. No conditional option agreement. He looked up. There's a page missing. Blair wiped his mouth. From a wet folder beside a dead man at a harbour? Fancy that. I saw a paper yesterday at the hotel. Signature line. Words, conditional option. It's not here. You saw half a page at a tea party and now you want me to chase ghosts? I want to know who Rusk was meeting. He was meeting Munro's temper. Hamish pushed the fish pie away. Blair noticed. Too fine for you? No. Too official. Back in Lochdubh, the Italian restaurant was warm, bright, and smelled of garlic, tomatoes, and the civilized part of the sea. Hamish took a corner table with a bowl of seafood chowder, and the harbour notes spread beside him. The chowder was thick with mussels, white fish, and potatoes. It restored his faith in both cooking and evidence. Mrs. Patel came in carrying a shopping bag and sat opposite him without asking. In Lochdubh, permission was often implied by usefulness. "They are saying Tavish did it," she said. "Who are they?" "People who like an answer before they have facts. That is a large family." She looked toward the window, where mist still pressed against the glass. "His mother came into the shop. She bought nothing. She held a tin of beans for nearly 5 minutes and put it back." Hamish said nothing. "People are already kind to her in the wrong way," Mrs. Patel continued. "Soft voices, long looks. It is how a village prepares to pity someone before it condemns them." Hamish dipped bread into the chowder. "Tavish did threaten Rusk." "Tavish threatens weather when it rains." He cut one of the survey ribbons. "He told you?" "Aye. Then it was probably the only dishonest thing he did honestly." Hamish smiled faintly. "That's a dangerous sentence." "It is a shopkeeper's sentence. We survive by knowing who lies with practice and who lies with embarrassment." Hamish turned the notes toward her, though not close enough for gossip to become evidence. The tide board was changed after midnight. Pin forced into the wrong hole. Who would touch it? Niall. Tavish sometimes. A few harbour men. Anyone, in theory. But not anyone in habit. No. Mrs. Patel nodded. And the flag? A scrap from Tavish's mooring flag was near Rusk's folder. That sounds too helpful. It often does when Blair likes it. Hamish checked the timeline again. Rusk left Tommel Castle not long after the consultation. He dined alone. According to the hotel night porter, he received a call near 11:30 and went out shortly before midnight, wearing the same coat found at the slip. He had said he would not be long. "Who called him?" Mrs. Patel asked. "Hotel switchboard only knows it came through the outside line." Man's voice. "Local, the porter thinks. Everyone here is local to someone." "Aye." Hamish's pencil rested on the word option. "Why take that page and leave the rest? If Tavish had killed Rusk in a rage, would he know which paper mattered? Would he risk searching a wet folder in the dark? Tavish was not stupid, but his anger was direct. It broke outward. This felt like someone cleaning up after a conversation. Mrs. Patel followed his gaze. "You are thinking of Mr. Fraser." "I'm thinking of a missing page." "That is safer. Niall stood for that harbour for years. People can stand for a thing and still lean on it too hard." Hamish glanced at her. She shrugged. "My husband used to say the best locks are opened by people trusted with keys." Outside, a figure passed the window. Tavish, head down, walking fast toward the harbour. 2 women on the pavement stopped speaking until he passed. He noticed. His shoulders tightened. Mrs. Patel saw it too. "There," she said quietly. "The case against him grows without evidence." Hamish folded the notes. At the harbour office, Niall was alone, sorting old forms into piles. The room smelled of damp wood, rope, and tobacco long after smoking had supposedly stopped there. On the wall, the mooring register sat in a battered cabinet. The tideboard outside creaked in the wind. "I need to see the register," Hamish said. Niall did not object. "That was almost disappointing. Take care of it," he said. "It is the memory of the place." Hamish opened the cabinet. The register was old, patched, and full of names written by different hands across different years. Tavish's birth was there. Morag's van arrangement was noted on a loose sheet. Niall's handwriting appeared often, neat and heavy. Hamish turned pages slowly. "Rusk asked for this," he said. "Rusk wanted everything. He said some defenders had made private arrangements." Niall's jaw moved. "Rusk was poison!" "That is not an answer. It is the answer he earned." Hamish looked up. For a moment, Niall seemed older than he had that morning. The committee face had slipped, showing fatigue, pride, and something sharper behind both. Then it was gone. "If you find anything in there," Niall said, "it will be because I kept the records when others could not be bothered." Hamish closed the register. "I believe you kept records." Niall's eyes held his. Then believe them properly. Outside, the tide had turned. Water moved slowly up the slip where Malcolm Rusk had died, covering and uncovering the stones, as if testing what could still be hidden. Hamish stepped to the tide-board before leaving. The blue pin had been removed for evidence, leaving a small empty hole among old scratches. A useful thing gone missing from its proper place. Like the page. Like the truth. Chapter 6. The Easy Fisherman. Tavish Munro's boat shed stood at the edge of the harbour like a thing built by worry. Its door had warped in the damp. Its roof was patched with tin sheets, old tar and hope. Inside, nets hung from hooks, floats rolled underfoot, and a paraffin heater coughed in the corner with the weary persistence of an old smoker. Hamish found Tavish mending a tier in a creel net. The young man's hands moved quickly, but not well. He was making mistakes and pulling them out again. "You'll ruin that if you keep fighting it," Hamish said. Tavish did not look up. "It's already ruined." "The net?" "The lot." Hamish came in and closed the door against the wind. Gulls stamped on the roof above them, indignant at not being included. Morag Munro stood near the back, sorting fish boxes that were already sorted. She had the fixed calm of a woman doing small work so she would not have to do large thinking. "I can come back," Hamish said. "No," she said. "Ask what you came to ask." "Folk are asking without asking anyway." Tavish threw the net down. "Blair thinks I killed him. Blair thinks shouting is evidence. I threatened Rusk." "Ah, yeah. I cut one of his survey ribbons too." Hamish watched him. "When?" "After the consultation, I went down to the harbour, saw one tied near my berth, took my knife and cut it. Then I went home." "Anyone see you?" "No. That was unhelpful of them." Tavish gave a short, bitter laugh. Morag turned. "He came home before midnight." "You were awake?" "I'm always awake when he's angry." The sentence sat quietly in the shed. Tavish flushed. "Ma'am, it is true." She looked at Hamish. "He came in, slammed about, made tea he did not drink, then sat at the table till near 1. I went to bed. He was still there." "Could he have gone out after?" She answered too quickly. "No!" Hamish saw Tavish close his eyes. "Ma'am?" Morag's mouth tightened. "I did not hear him go out." "That is not the same," Hamish said gently. "No." Tavish picked at a rope end. "I did go out." Morag stared at him. "Not to meet Rusk," Tavish said quickly. "I couldn't sleep. Went down past the sheds, maybe 1:30. I didn't go near the lower slip. I walked to the pier head and back." "See anyone?" "Mist. Boats. Nothing useful." "Touch the tide-board?" "No." "Touch your mooring flag?" He looked up sharply. "Why?" A scrap of it was found near Rusk's folder. Tavish's face emptied. Morag gripped the edge of a fish box. "That's planted," Tavish said. "It may be." "It is." Hamish took from his pocket a photograph of the scrap, not the evidence itself. "Is this yours?" Tavish stared at it. "Aye. Same cloth. Could have torn loose?" "No." "I tie my flags tight." "How?" "Double half hitch. Always." He reached for a spare line and showed him without being asked. His fingers moved from habit now. Clean and fast, despite the shaking. Loop, turn, pull, second turn, snug. A fisherman's knot. Practical and quick. Hamish studied the photograph again. The scrap recovered near Rusk's folder had been tied differently. Neater. Flatter. A reef knot. The sort used by older harbour men who had learned to make things tidy for notice boards, tarpaulins, and committee demonstrations. Not Tavish's knot. The shed door banged open. Blair filled the doorway, damp and triumphant. "There you are!" Hamish sighed. "Most doors have a handle, Blair. Spare me your rustic wit." Blair pointed at Tavish. "You coming to Strathbane?" Morag stepped forward. "For what?" "For helping with inquiries. That's what you say when you've decided already." Blair glared at her. "Do not teach me my job, Mrs. Munro." Hamish moved between them. "He'll answer questions. He's now under arrest." Blair's eyes narrowed. You do not decide that. No. Evidence does. We have evidence. Threat. Opportunity. His flag beside the body. And a wrong tide board, which he could have changed. Why would he? To lure Rusk. Tavish barely knew how to lure himself to a consultation. Tavish looked offended. Here. Hamish did not take his eyes off Blair. The knot on the flag scrap is wrong. Blair blinked. What? Tavish ties with a double half hitch. The scrap was tied with a reef knot. Blair's face showed the honest misery of a man confronted by rope terminology. A knot is a knot. A sentence is a sentence. But some are lies. Blair turned red. Do you think a jury will care what pretty bow he used? No. But a murderer planting cloth might. For a moment, the paraffin heater was the loudest thing in the shed. Blair jabbed a finger at Tavish. You still came out after midnight. Tavish swallowed. Aye, there. You lied. I was afraid. Good. Keep being afraid. It may improve your memory. Morag's face hardened. You have enough men to frighten him? Have you enough to find who did it? Blair opened his mouth, then shut it. There were some remarks even he knew not to make with Hamish standing near. Hamish turned to Tavish. You'll come in later and give a proper statement. Every step, every time. No protecting your pride. It's too expensive. Tavish nodded. Blair looked furious. I'll be waiting. Aye, said Hamish. Try not to solve it completely before lunch. Blair left with a final slam that shook dust from the rafters. Morag sat down on an overturned crate. For the first time that day, she looked old. I told him not to shout, she said. Tavish's voice was low. You told me not to be walked over. That too. Hamish put the photograph away. Someone wants folk looking at your temper. They will, Tavish said. It's easier than looking elsewhere. Hamish could not argue with that. Outside the shed, the harbour was grey and restless. The flags snapped along the moorings, and one space near Tavish's berth showed where cloth had been cut away. Hamish looked back once before leaving. Tavish had picked up the net again. This time his hands moved more carefully. Morag watched him in silence, and the paraffin heater coughed as if clearing its throat before bad news. The case against Tavish still stood, but one small knot had begun to loosen. Chapter 7. Hamish's big mistake. Rain turned Patel's shop into a refuge by 3 o'clock. People came in for milk, matches, newspapers, onions, and the chance to say they had only stepped inside because of the weather. Coats steamed near the door. Boots left dark marks on the floor. The bell rang so often that Mrs. Patel threatened to charge it rent. Hamish stood by the counter with a loaf he did not need. You are not here for bread, Mrs. Patel said. I may develop a sudden interest. You have had that loaf upside down for 5 minutes. He turned it over. Better? No. Near the window, Nessie and Jessie Curry examined tins of peaches with deep concentration. They were not listening, which in their case meant they had not yet moved close enough. Hamish lowered his voice. There's something about the flag scrap. Mrs. Patel's expression did not change, but her hands stilled over the till. Tavish's flag? Aye. It looks like it's cloth. But the knot is wrong. Tavish ties a double half-hitch. The scrap near Rusk was tied with a reef knot. Mrs. Patel looked toward the Curry sisters. They were now considering marmalade, which required no consideration. And you are telling me this because? Because if Blair hears it loose, he'll trample over everyone asking who knows knots. I need to find where that scrap came from before the whole village starts defending or accusing Tavish with rope lessons. So you want me not to repeat it? Aye. Mrs. Patel leaned on the counter. Hamish, when a man tells a shopkeeper not to repeat something, he is placing a hot kettle in the middle of the floor and asking children not to notice steam. I'm asking you. That is different. She paused. I will be careful. Hamish should have stopped there. Instead, because he was tired, irritated by Blair, and troubled by the missing option page, he added, if folk start saying the flag was planted, Tavish may become a martyr before he stops being a suspect. Mrs. Patel's eyes sharpened. "That is not the same as the not being wrong." "No? Then you should not say both in the same breath." He knew she was right the moment she said it. But words, once spoken in Patel's shop, did not remain words. They became parcels, and parcels were carried. By late afternoon, the rain had eased and the harbour had worsened. Tavish walked past the quay, and 3 men stopped talking. One of them nodded too heartily. Another looked away. Malcolm Munro opened the back of her fish van and found someone had left a basket of potatoes by the wheel without a note. Kindness, in Lochdubh, could sometimes feel like a verdict. At the harbour office, Niall Fraser had pinned up a notice calling for a public meeting the following evening. "Protecting our harbour. All local users and concerned residents welcome." Hamish read it twice. "Quick work," he said. Niall came out of the office, buttoning his coat. "Folk need a place to speak. They've been speaking. Then they need a place to speak in order. Order is not always truth." Niall looked at him. "And silence is not always wisdom." There was no warmth in the exchange, but not open hostility either. It was worse. The careful politeness of men who knew the other was thinking too much. Near the sheds, Tavish was arguing with 2 older fishermen. "I didna ask anyone to make speeches for me," he snapped. "You need support," said one. "I need work. You need folk to know that cloth was planted." Hamish closed his eyes briefly. There it was. Not the knot was wrong. Not the evidence should be checked. Planted. A better word for anger than truth. He turned and walked up toward the old ferry sheds, where Sandy Beaton lived in a cottage with peeling blue paint and windows that looked permanently doubtful. Sandy had worked ferries before his hip failed, and the council decided men were cheaper to retire than repair. He knew tides, ropes, night sounds, and everybody's footsteps when they crossed the quay. Hamish found him splitting kindling under a lean-to. "You'll have heard about Rusk," Hamish said. Sandy did not look up. "Aye, you were awake that night. I'm awake most nights. See anything?" The axe came down. Wood cracked cleanly. "No." Hamish waited. Sandy picked up another piece. "Sandy." The old man's mouth tightened. Mist was thick. "That was not my question." "No." Hamish looked toward the harbour. "Someone changed the tide board after midnight." Sandy's hands stopped. There are silences that mean ignorance, and silences that mean fear. This was the second. "You saw someone," Hamish said. "I saw a shape." "Whose?" "A shape in mist is a shape." "You know this harbour in the dark." Sandy's jaw worked. "My daughter leases the end shed from Niall." Hamish said nothing. "She keeps lobster pots there," Sandy continued. "If she loses it, she loses half her season. I am an old man with a bad hip and no wish to make enemies for my children. You'd let Tavish carry it?" "I'd let proof carry it. Not an old man's guess." "Was it Niall?" Sandy looked at him then, sharply. "I did not say that." "No. And you will not say I did." Hamish nodded. "Not yet. Not ever. Unless you have more than my eyes in fog." The axe came down again, but the split was poor. Hamish walked back through the village, with rain dripping from the eaves, and irritation sitting cold under his ribs. He had wanted to protect a clue from Blair. Instead, he had given Lochdubh a new story. Tavish framed, Rusk murdered, unknown traitor among them. A police car was waiting outside the station. Blair stood beside it, smoking under the shelter of Hamish's own doorway, as if he owned both cigarette and threshold. "There you are," Blair said. "Senior officers are asking why the village is now shouting about planted evidence. Maybe because someone planted evidence. Maybe because you cannot keep your mouth shut." Hamish said nothing. Blair jabbed the cigarette toward him. "If this harbour nonsense is not quiet by tomorrow, Strathbane may decide you're wasted here. Public liaison post, community communications. You'd be grand at smiling beside notice boards." Hamish stared at him. "I'd rather fall in the loch. That can be arranged." "By you?" "You'd miss." Blair's face reddened. "This is serious, Macbeth. You keep stirring them up, and you'll be promoted out of here before your dog learns to salute." Hamish glanced toward the station window, where Luggs had placed his nose against the glass and was fogging it with indifference. "He's no ambitious," Hamish said. "Neither are you. That's the problem." Blair threw his cigarette into a puddle and drove off too fast. By evening, the harbour was loud with quiet conversations. Men stood in pairs, not groups. Women carried news in shopping bags and returned with corrections. The tide board, missing its blue pin, looked oddly wounded. Hamish stood beside it as the light thinned. He had made a mistake. Not a grand one. Not the sort Blair would understand. He had let a careful fact turn into a useful rumour. And useful rumours, in Lochdubh, could do nearly as much damage as lies. Across the harbour, Niall Fraser locked the office door and slipped the key into his coat pocket. Then he paused, looked once toward the tide board, and walked away without touching it. Chapter 8. The Pin in the Cuff. By night, Lochdubh had grown tired of talking, and continued anyway. Lights burned behind curtains. Figures moved between houses with unnecessary parcels. At the harbour, the public meeting notice flapped under a drawing pin, and the empty place on the tide board showed where the blue enamel pin had been removed for evidence. Hamish sat in his police station kitchen with Rusk's damp folder, the scene photographs, and 3 mugs of tea in different stages of abandonment. Rain tapped the window. Luggs had taken the warmest patch near the stove and was sleeping with the calm certainty that no murder, marina, or transfer threat could improve on rest. On the sill, Sunsy appeared suddenly, wet, narrow, and offended by weather. Hamish opened the window. She came in as if admitting him to her house. "You're late," he said. Sunsy ignored him and jumped onto the table. "Off." She stepped delicately over Rusk's papers, knocked a pencil to the floor, and sat on the evidence envelope containing Rusk's coat fibres. Hamish sighed. "Aye. Very helpful." He moved her gently aside. She flicked her tail, caught the corner of the envelope, and sent a small, dark crescent skittering across the table. Hamish froze. It was no larger than a clipped fingernail, blue on one side, dull metal beneath. He lifted it with tweezers and held it under the lamp. A kip of enamel, not a flake from the board. Larger, curved, broken from the edge of the pin itself. The label on the envelope showed it had come from the cuff seam of Rusk's coat, logged as paint fragment not yet matched. Hamish sat back slowly. A man slipping on wet stone might fall near a tide board. He might scrape a sleeve on wood, but a larger enamel chip caught in the cuff suggested contact at close quarters. A grab, a scuffle, a hand thrown out. Rusk had been near the pin while it was being forced, or he had seized the person using it. Hamish spread the photographs. The wrong tide hole showed fresh scratches. The wet stone below it held tiny blue flakes. Rusk's cuff held the larger crescent. The planted flag scrap lay near the folder, and the missing page remained missing. He rose and took from his shelf the old Harbour Register notes he had copied that afternoon. Rusk's handwriting in the folder had listed Fraser, Munro, disputed moorings, option, Fraser first. Not proof, but direction. He fetched the photograph of the tide flag scrap and laid it beside Tavish's demonstration knot. Double half hitch on the spare line. Reef knot on the scrap. Older hands, neater habit. Niall had tied notice cords at the harbour office for years. Tarpaulins, committee papers, warning ropes, temporary markers, reef knots everywhere because reef knots lay flat and looked tidy. Hamish rubbed his forehead. He did not want it to be Niall. That was not evidence either. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Patel came in with a covered bowl. "You have not eaten." "I had tea." "Tea is not dinner. It is an apology for weather." She set the bowl down. "Lentil soup. You'll make me too comfortable to detect. You have not looked comfortable since the flags arrived." Her eyes moved to the papers. "You have found something." A chip from the tideboard pin. In Rusk's cuff. She stood very still. "So, he touched it? Or—" someone holding it. Or he grabbed at the board during an argument. And Tavish? Tavish had no reason to alter the tide board. His anger would have gone at Rusk, not at the tide. Mrs. Patel nodded. Angry men shout at faces. Careful men move signs. Hamish looked at her. That is very neatly said. I have had a shop for many years. He handed her nothing, but he turned the photograph enough for her to see the knot. The flag was planted, she said. The flag was tied by someone who did not tie like Tavish. Different thing. Ah, yeah. She accepted the correction with a small nod. Outside, a car passed slowly, then stopped. Through the rain-blurred window, Hamish saw headlights near the harbour office. He blew out the lamp on the table, leaving only the stove light, and crossed to the door. Stay here, he said. Mrs. Patel looked offended. I am not Sunsy. Sunsy, who had settled on a chair, gave no sign of caring. Hamish slipped into his coat and went down toward the harbour by the back way. The rain had softened to mist. The boats creaked at their ropes. The tide was halfway in, muttering under the quay. A figure stood at the harbour office door. Niall Fraser. He had a key in his hand, but he had not opened the door. He stood facing the tide board, his shoulders hunched, his cap low. For a long moment he did nothing. Then he reached out and touched the empty hole where the blue pin had been. Hamish stayed in shadow. Niall withdrew his hand quickly, as if the board had burned him. He looked around once. Not guiltily in the crude way of bad theatre, but with the weary caution of a man who had begun to fear the objects he once trusted. Then he unlocked the harbour office and went inside. A light came on. Hamish waited until Niall had moved away from the window. Then he stepped closer to the notice board outside. Behind the meeting notice, half hidden by damp curling paper, was a pin scratch in the wood and a smear of blue dust caught in old varnish. The blue enamel had not only broken at the tide board. Someone had handled that pin near the notices too. Hamish looked at the harbour office door. The missing option page had not vanished into the sea. He felt that now, with the cold certainty that came when little facts began pointing the same way. It had been put somewhere ordinary, somewhere nobody would search until after a meeting. Back at the station, Mrs. Patel had poured soup into a mug. Well? Niall went to the harbour office. At night? Ah, yeah. That could be innocent. It could. You do not believe it is. I'm trying to. Hamish sat and looked again at the crescent of blue enamel under the lamp. The village wanted Tavish because Tavish was loud. Blair wanted Tavish because Tavish was easy. But the pin, the knot, the missing page, and Rusk's hidden smile all pointed elsewhere. Sunsy leapt down from the chair and vanished through the half-open window, leaving wet prints across the sill. Hamish picked up the tiny blue chip and sealed it carefully. A small thing, but small things had a habit of surviving when people's stories did not. Chapter 9. The Harbour Meeting. The public room above the post office was too small for anger. By 7 o'clock it held fishermen, shopkeepers, hotel staff, crofters, the Curry sisters, Mrs. Patel, Morag Munro, Tavish, and several people who had claimed they were only there because rain was forecast. Wet coats steamed along the wall. The windows had misted from the inside. Someone had brought a plate of shortbread, which sat untouched because nobody wished to look casual. Niall Fraser stood at the front beside a table and the old harbour ledger. He looked tired but composed. That was his gift. Niall could make even trouble seem properly chaired. "We are here," he began, "because Lochdubh harbour must not be spoken for by men who do not live by it." There were murmurs of approval. Tavish stood near the back with his arms folded. No one had asked him to move away, but no one had moved very close either. Morag stood beside him, chin lifted, daring the room to pity her. Hamish Macbeth entered quietly and took a place by the door. Niall saw him. For half a second his voice caught, then it steadied. "We also need," Niall continued, "to stop turning on one another before the facts are known." "A fine thought," said Mrs. Patel. The room turned. She looked innocent. "I meant it." Niall gave a small nod. Then let us begin with—" The door opened hard. Blair came in late, damp, red-faced, and pleased with himself. "No need for speeches. I'm here to take Tavish Munro in." Morag made one sharp sound. Tavish pushed himself off the wall. "For what?" "For murder," said Blair. The room recoiled. Not far, but enough. Hamish stepped forward. "No," Blair swung toward him. "Do not start, Macbeth. I'm finishing." The softness had gone from Hamish's voice. What remained was quiet and edged. Blair jabbed a finger at Tavish. "Threatened the victim. Out after midnight. His flag at the scene. That is enough." "No," said Hamish. "It is enough for a lazy answer." A murmur ran through the room. Blair's face darkened. "You watch your mouth." "I have been watching. That's the difference." Hamish moved to the front table. He laid down 3 small evidence bags and a folded paper. Niall's eyes went to the paper first. Hamish saw it. "This began with the tide board," Hamish said. "Not with Tavish's temper. The board said the lower slip was safe when it was not. The blue enamel pin had been forced into the wrong hole." He lifted the first bag. Flakes of blue enamel were found below that wrong hole. He lifted the second. A larger chip was found in Malcolm Rusk's cuff. Jessie Curry whispered. "In his cuff?" Nessie whispered back. "That is very specific." "Aye," said Hamish, without looking at them. "Specific things are useful." He placed the third bag down. "And blue dust was found by the harbour notices, where the same pin had been handled after it broke." Niall said, "Many people touch that board." "They do," said Hamish. "But few would have a reason to move it after midnight. Summon Rusk to the slip, and then hide the one paper missing from his folder." Blair looked at the folded sheet. "What paper?" Hamish opened it. "A conditional option agreement, signed privately. It gave Malcolm Rusk's company leverage over future mooring arrangements if the marina plan went forward." The room was silent now. Hamish did not look at Tavish. He looked at Niall. "The signature is yours." Someone breathed out hard. Niall's face had gone stiff. "That was not what it seems." "It seldom is," said Hamish. "You do not understand harbour business." "I understand a bargain hidden behind public speeches." Niall's hand tightened on the edge of the table. "I signed nothing that sold Lochdubh." "No. You signed something that would let you profit from managing how it was sold." The words landed without drama. That made them worse. Tavish stared at Niall, as if the older man had become unfamiliar in his own clothes. "You told us to stand together," Tavish said. "I was trying to keep control," Niall snapped. Hamish went on, steady. "Rusk did not come to the slip by accident. He had found the danger in your position. At the hotel, I saw him hide this page when you came near. Later, he had a call, a local man's voice. He went out near midnight. You cannot prove it was me," said Niall. "I can prove what happened after." Hamish lifted the photograph of the flag scrap. Tavish's cloth was planted near Rusk's folder, but it was tied with a reef knot. Tavish uses a double half-hitch. Always. The planted knot was older, neater, the sort used by someone who ties notices, tarpaulins, and committee cords so they lie flat. Several faces turned toward the old ledger and the notices Niall had pinned up all his life. Niall's mouth twisted. "That is nonsense!" Sandy Beaton saw someone at the tide board after midnight. At the back of the room, old Sandy shifted his weight. His face was grey. "I saw a man," he said. "In the mist." Niall turned on him. "You said nothing." "I was afraid for my daughter's shed." Sandy swallowed. "But I know your walk, Niall. I have known it 40 years. The room changed again. Fear became recognition. Hamish picked up the conditional option page. "I found this behind the tide notices in the harbour office, hidden in the one place no one would search until after this meeting, because everyone would be here listening to you defend the harbour." Niall's composure cracked. "Only a little, but enough. Rusk was going to ruin everything," he said. "He wanted more than we agreed." He was going to tell folk I had signed. Do you know what they would have done? They would have handed the harbour to him out of spite. No, said Hamish. They would have known the truth. The truth? Niall's voice rose. The truth is that this place is dying by inches. Boats cost money. Repairs cost money. Young folk leave. Old men talk about the way it was and pay for nothing. I thought, if I kept close to Rusk, I could guide it, control it, stop the worst. By lying? By managing change before it managed us. Tavish took one step forward. You used my flag. Niall looked at him then, and shame passed across his face so quickly it might have been missed by anyone who did not know what shame cost a proud man. You were easy, Niall said. Morag lifted her hand as if to strike him. Then let it fall. Hamish's voice stayed low. Rusk met you at the slip. He threatened to expose you. You moved the tide board to make it seem safe, to make a fall believable in the mist. There was a struggle. The pin broke. A piece caught in his cuff. Afterward, you planted Tavish's flag scrap and took the page. Niall said nothing. Blair, who had been silent too long for his own comfort, stepped forward. Niall Fraser, I am arresting. You'll do it properly, Hamish said. Blair glared, but the room was watching, and even he could feel the weight of it. Niall did not run. He did not protest. He looked once toward the window, though the harbour could not be seen through the misted glass. I loved that Quay, he said. Hamish answered softly. Aye, but you loved being its voice more. No one moved as Blair took Niall away. After the door closed, the room remained full of wet coats, cold tea, and people who had come to blame an outsider, or a young fisherman, and had found betrayal wearing familiar boots. Tavish stood very still. Then Mrs. Patel crossed the room and placed the untouched shortbread plate in front of him. Eat, she said. He looked at her. It is not forgiveness, she added. It is sugar. That was enough to let the room breathe again. Chapter 10. The Man Who Loved the Quay Too Much. For 10 minutes after Niall Fraser was taken downstairs, nobody in the public room knew what to do with their hands. They had come ready to argue. Argument had uses. It gave shape to fear. It let men slap caps against knees and women tighten their mouths over better sentences. But betrayal did not give the room anything as useful as anger at first. It left people holding cups, coats, and bits of themselves they had thought safe. Mrs. Patel poured tea, because tea was sometimes the only bridge between shock and the next necessary thing. Nessie Curry sat with a biscuit untouched in her lap. Jessie whispered. He chaired my cousin's funeral tea, Nessie whispered back. He got extra chairs from the kirk. It was not gossip now. It was inventory. People were counting all the ordinary kindnesses that had made the larger lie harder to bear. Tavish stood by the window, staring through misted glass at nothing. Morag had one hand tucked into his elbow, not holding him back, only proving he was not alone. Old Sandy Beaton sat near the door, his face grey with the cost of speaking. Hamish went to him. You did right. Sandy's mouth twisted. Late. Late is no never. My daughter will lose that shed. She will not. You cannot promise that. No. But Niall Canay threaten it now. Sandy nodded once, not comforted, but less alone with it. Blair came back in then, pushing the door with his shoulder. His face had the flushed look of a man trying to turn embarrassment into authority. Right, he said. Statements. Nobody leaves till we've got names, times, and what you saw. A crofter near the back murmured. We all saw you arrive late. Hamish looked at the floor. Blair did not hear, which was kind of Providence. He planted himself near the table. I had my eye on Fraser from the start. The silence that followed was delicate enough to frame. Mrs. Patel handed him a cup of tea. Then your eye was very discreet. A small laugh moved through the room. It was not a happy laugh, but it helped people remember how to breathe. Blair scowled. Macbeth! Downstairs! Hamish followed him. The post office below was closed for the night, though it still smelled faintly of paper, dust, and boiled sweets. Niall sat on a wooden chair near the sorting counter, watched by Macnab, who had arrived quietly and sensibly, as if to make up for Blair. Niall looked smaller without the table in front of him. His cap rested on his knees. His hands, broad and weathered, held it by the brim. There was a dark smear on one sleeve, where old harbour dirt had worked itself permanently into the wool. Hamish thought of the blue enamel flake Niall had wiped away on the first morning. So small a gesture, so much hidden in it. Niall looked up. "You enjoyed that?" "No. You sounded as if you did." "I sounded clear." "That is worse," Blair snapped. "You can save your speeches for the solicitor." Niall ignored him and kept his eyes on Hamish. "Rusk would have gutted the place." "Aye, maybe." He would have moved the working boats to the far side, put in visitor berths, charged winter fees, made the van apply for some licence Morag could never afford. Maybe. Maybe? Niall's voice cracked. "You saw the drawings?" "I did." "Then you know." "I know he wanted money. I know he was arrogant. I know he thought Lochdubh was scenery with accounting errors." Niall's mouth tightened. Hamish stepped closer. "But Rusk did not make you sign." Niall shut his eyes. "I thought if I kept a hand in," he said, "if I was inside the bargain, I could steer it. Stop the worst. Keep berths for locals. Protect the old names. And take your payment for the trouble." A flush rose up Niall's neck. "Do you think a man lives on, thanks? 40 years I kept that harbour right. Wrote letters, chased grants, took abuse from men who couldn't fill a form but knew how to complain. I earned something." "Aye," said Hamish. "Trust." Niall flinched, as if the word had struck him. For a moment, Hamish almost pitied him. Not because Niall deserved pity more than Tavish or Morag or Sandy, but because he had made a prison out of the thing he loved. He had stood so long at the harbour's centre that he had begun to mistake service for ownership. Niall opened his eyes. "He laughed at me." "Rusk? Said I was no better than him, only cheaper. Said he would show the whole village the paper if I did not help push the plan through quickly." Niall's hands tightened on the cap. "I told him to come down. I only meant to frighten him." Blair barked. "Of course you did." Niall's face hardened. "You keep out of it. You wanted the easy boy." Blair took a step forward. Macnab quietly moved half a step too. Blair stopped. Hamish said, "What happened at the board?" Niall's voice lowered. "He had the paper. He kept waving it. I took the pin from the board to show him the safe window was not what he thought. Foolish thing. We argued. He grabbed my sleeve. I pushed him off. The pin struck the board, broke, and he slipped." "And after?" Niall's breathing changed. "After was where accident became choice. After was where panic looked around and found a young man's temper, a torn flag, and a mist thick enough to hide shame." "I saw the cloth by Tavish's berth," Niall said, "where he'd cut the survey ribbon. I thought, you thought folk would believe it. They already half did." "Aye," said Hamish. "That was what made it cruel." Niall looked away. Blair muttered something about confession and paperwork. Macnab began the formal caution properly, in a voice that belonged to the law rather than to Blair's appetite for it. Hamish went back upstairs. The room quieted as he entered. He did not give them details. "There are truths a village has a right to know, and details it only wants because hurt makes people hungry. Niall has admitted enough," Hamish said. "There will be statements to take. Tavish Munro is no longer the shape of this case." Tavish looked at him then. Not grateful exactly. Gratitude would come later, if it came at all. For now there was only exhaustion, and the first painful loosening of a rope pulled too tight. Mrs. Patel stood. "Then we will finish the tea." "We are being kept for statements," said Jessie. "People can drink while remembering," said Mrs. Patel. That seemed reasonable even to Blair, who was not present to object. Slowly, chairs scraped. Cups were filled. Someone passed the shortbread. Morag accepted a piece and broke it in half, giving one half to Tavish without looking at him. He ate because she had given it, not because he wanted it. Hamish stood near the window. The mist had thinned enough for the harbour lamps to show below, soft and blurred. Somewhere down there, the tide-board waited without its pin. Priscilla came in near the end, having heard enough from the hotel staff to know not to ask too much at once. She looked around the room, then at Hamish. Bad? Aye. Finished? No. She understood that. In a small place, an arrest did not finish anything. It merely told people where to begin feeling ashamed. Blair returned after half an hour and announced to no one in particular that Strathbane would handle the matter from here. This restored a small amount of normal irritation to the room, for which Hamish was almost thankful. As people left, they did not crowd Tavish. That would have been too easy and too late. But one fisherman paused at the door and said, "I'll help you mend that torn flag tomorrow." Another said, "Your mother's van should stay where it is." Morag gave him a look. "It should have stayed there before my son was useful to pity." The man flushed and nodded. It was as close to grace as the evening allowed. When the room emptied, Hamish remained with Mrs. Patel, stacking cups. "You told him love is not ownership," she said. "I didna use those words. You rarely use your best ones aloud." Hamish smiled faintly. Below, a car door shut. Niall Fraser was being taken away from the village he had tried to sell while claiming to save it. Hamish looked once more toward the harbour lights. A man could love a place truly and still harm it deeply. That was the pity of the thing. It would have been easier if Niall had been only greedy, easier still if Rusk had been only a villain. But Lochdubh had been wounded not by one clean evil, but by pride wearing old boots and speaking the language of care. Hamish lifted the last cup from the table. Outside, the tide moved in the dark, indifferent to plans, meetings, and men who thought they could manage it. Chapter 11. Low water. By morning, the mist had gone. Lochdubh Harbour lay exposed under a pale, clean sky. Every rope, stain, crack, and fish box showing more clearly than people might have wished. The tide was low. Boats rested against wet stone. Seaweed shone on the slip where Malcolm Rusk had fallen, and gulls argued over nothing with their usual confidence. Hamish stood by the tide-board, while a councilman fitted a new pin. It was red enamel, not blue. "That'll confuse folk," said Tavish Munro. "It marks the tide, not tradition," said Hamish. Tavish gave him a look. "You sound like a notice. A short one, I hope." The young fisherman almost smiled. Almost was progress. His torn mooring flag had been taken down. Another fisherman, the one who had offered help the night before, was tying a replacement cloth to the line. He did it badly at first, then looked toward Tavish. "Double half hitch, is it?" Tavish hesitated. "Aye." He went over and showed him. Neither man said anything about apology. The knot did that work for them. Above the harbour, Morag opened the back of her fish van. For several minutes no one approached. Then Mrs. Patel came down the road with an empty basket. "I need haddock," she said. Morag lifted her chin. "For the shop?" "For dinner. I am allowed dinner. You usually say fish is cheaper when bought at the pier. I am in a generous mood." "No, you're not." "No," Mrs. Patel agreed. "But I am practical." She bought more than she needed and paid without comment. After that, other people remembered they required fish too. Kindness returned to Lochdubh in small, awkward shapes. Someone repaired the loose latch on Tavish's shed. Someone stacked Morag's empty fish boxes neatly instead of leaving them where rain gathered. Jessie Curry told Tavish that she had never truly believed he was guilty, only that it had seemed socially possible, and Nessie added that this was not the same as suspicion. Tavish did not appear comforted, but he did not walk away. Blair arrived late enough to suggest importance, and early enough to be irritating. He stepped from his car holding a folder, and wearing the expression of a man who had personally instructed justice to occur. "Macbeth," he said, "Strathbane will be taking full control of the Fraser matter." "Aye." And the Rusk Company papers. Ah, yeah. And any nautical equipment relevant to the case. Hamish looked at him. Nautical equipment? The board thing. The tide pointer. The blue button. The chipped blue enamel tideboard pin. That's what I said. It is not. Blair ignored this. Senior officers are pleased with the progress. Grand. I made clear I had concerns about Fraser early on. You hid them well. Blair squinted at him, unsure whether insult had been committed. Then he spotted Priscilla coming down from the hotel path and straightened his coat. Priscilla, mercifully, had come for Hamish. The hotel is full of people pretending they never liked Mr. Rusk, she said. It is exhausting. Folk improve their memories after a death, and after an arrest. They stood together looking at the harbour. Without mist, the marina flag seemed smaller and sillier. Will the plan go ahead? She asked. Some version of a plan always goes ahead. The question is, who gets to read it before signing? Priscilla nodded. Lochdubh will fight. Lochdubh will argue. Then form a subcommittee, then argue about the subcommittee. That sounds healthy. For Lochdubh, aye. Near the tideboard, the councilman finished his work and stepped back. The new red pin sat firmly in place, marking the proper safe window. The old blue pin, chipped along one edge, lay sealed in an evidence bag in Hamish's pocket. He had looked at it once that morning. It seemed too small to have carried so much harm, but that was the way with useful things. People trusted them because they were ordinary. Tavish came over, wiping his hands on his trousers. Did Niall say anything else? Enough. Did he mean to kill him? Hamish watched the tide sliding back from the stones. He meant to lie. Death followed. Tavish absorbed that. He used me because I was loud. Aye. I was loud because nobody listened. Aye. That doesna make me clever. No, said Hamish. But it might make you careful. Tavish looked toward his mother's van. I'll try. It was not a grand vow. Grand vows rarely lasted past weather. A small promise spoken in daylight had a better chance. Lugs, who had refused to set paw on the wet slip, sat beside the harbour wall and watched a dropped sandwich with professional focus. Sunsea moved along the top of the wall, tail lifted, ignoring humans, law, and civic repair. She paused above the tideboard, looked down at Hamish, and vanished behind a stack of creels. Hamish took that as approval, or possibly contempt. With Sunsea, the distinction was often beyond police training. By noon, Lochdubh had begun returning to itself. Boats needed checking, tea needed making, the shop bell rang. The hotel complained about cancelled bookings while quietly preparing for new ones caused by scandal. The Curry sisters carried corrected versions of yesterday's corrected versions up the hill. But something had changed. People looked at the harbour office differently now. Not with hatred exactly, with caution. A room where a trusted man had hidden a paper could not become innocent again merely because the paper was found. Hamish stood at the tideboard until the new pin's shadow shifted. The harbour would still have arguments about money, berths, fees, tourists, repairs, and whether planters were an insult to fish. Those arguments might even do good, now that no one man could claim to speak for everyone. He turned away at last. Behind him, the red pin marked safe water. In his pocket, the chipped blue one marked the cost of a lie. Lochdubh kept its harbour, at least for the moment. It did not keep its innocence about who could speak for it. The village still argued about moorings, repairs, visitor fees, and the future, but people listened more carefully when someone claimed to be defending them. The chipped blue tideboard pin had been meant to mark safe water. In the end, it marked a lie. It reminded Lochdubh that even a small trusted sign can become dangerous when trusted hands move it for private reasons. There is a kind of betrayal that arrives wearing local boots and speaking warmly of home. A community should beware not only the outsider who wants to buy it, but the neighbour who thinks he has the right to sell it. By evening, kettles boiled, boats rocked softly, and the harbour smelled of salt, diesel, and ordinary work. Lugs slept through the improvement of civic honesty. Sunsea disappeared along the wall as if she had known all along that humans made poor tide markers. Who is more dangerous to a small community, the outsider who wants to change it, or the insider who claims to protect it while making private bargains? Thank you for visiting Lochdubh Harbour with us tonight. If this mystery kept you listening, leave a light in the window for the next Misty case. And when the village blames the loudest young fisherman, Hamish follows a blue enamel chip to the man who sold the harbour twice.